Welcome to ePathshala lecture series on computer science. Today we are going to see the 30th module of web technology paper JSP. I think earlier you would have studied about servlets. Servlets, basics of servlets, how a server-side programming has been done using servlets, those things you would have studied earlier. Today we are going to see the advantages of JSP, to discuss about the architecture of JSP, to discuss the different components and tags, directives which are available with the JSP, and to create small web applications using JSP. This is our learning objective today. Let me introduce what is JSP first. JSP stands for Java Server Page. JSP is of course a high level abstraction of Java servlet technology. JSP, similar to servlet, this is also a server-side technology which generates web pages dynamically in response to the client request. JSP provides a way to separate the generation of dynamic content from its presentation. In the earlier server-side technology of servlets, the presentation as well as the dynamic content would not have been separated. Both of them have been done in the same page, but here in the JSP, the separation, proper bifurcation or proper segregation of the dynamic content from the presentation layer has been made. So that is what the difference, or that is what the advantage of this JSP. One more advantage or one more crucial point is, in a regular HTML file, Java code can be inserted for the dynamic parts using special tags. First let us see why we have to go for the server side technology JSP. The JSP page is easy to learn. It allows the developers to produce the websites very quickly. It is very easier to develop applications in an open and a standard way. The second point why we go for JSP is this of course offers a robust platform for web development. So the main significance of JSP is about they support cross web server support. It gives cross platform support. Across the platforms we can make use of it, and it produces the advantages of Java, because Java is an object oriented language. Whatever the benefits provided by Java can be reused here. Then component reusability is one of the major advantage which is promoted by JSP. Component reusability has been done here using Java Beans and EJB. Now let us deeply look into the difference between servlets and JSP. Servlets also is a server-side Java program. JSP is also a server-side Java program. We used servlets because of the scalability issue, because servlets runs on threads of execution, so multiple threads can execute, but they doesn't execute on different processes. Servlets solves the portability issue. It runs across the platforms that supports Java, and it is supported by most of the popular web servers. So the same thing can be done with the JSP also, but the disadvantages or the issues which are available with the servlets are the HTML tags are embedded in the Java programs with out.print statements. I think you would have studied earlier that out.print statements has been completely embedded or mixed with the HTML tags. This reduces the flexibility of programming, because the application logic as well as the formatting, because formatting is provided by the HTML tags and application logic is provided by the servlet. Both of these things has been closely tied together. They are mixed together and given in a same servlet program. And reusability of code is of course difficult, because if we want to change the code for a different logic, since these two things are closely tied, we cannot separate the application logic as well as the formatting. The entire code has to be repeated. So this is what a serious disadvantage of servlet. Now let us look into the advantages of JSP. Even though this is a server-side technology, we claim that this is a higher abstraction of servlets. And the main advantage is it separates the presentation logic and the application logic. Here the presentation logic is formatting and the application logic is the dynamic content. from the static contents of a web page. So both of these things, formatting and logic, are not closely tied together. So the application logic can be provided with the help of scriptlets or the Java code, where presentation logic can be done with the help of HTML tags. So this of course separates the work of Java programmers and the page designers. So that is why JSP promotes reusability of code very much when compared to servlets. Now let us look through what are the JSP engines, or which are the engines where JSP pages works. To process the JSP pages, we require an engine that is called as JSP engine. JSP engine normally runs under the supervision of the servlet engine. JSP engine, even we can say that the JSP engine is typically connected with the web server, because I think you have studied web server. What is web server, how to deploy the servlet in a web server in the earlier sessions. So typically the JSP engine can be typically connected with a web server, or we can integrate it inside a web server or an application server. So the entire environment is called as web container. So the web server, which provides you the runtime environment of a JSP, the entire thing is called as web container. So the web servers which could be used to, the web server which can act as a JSP engine or which could be used to process the JSP pages could be Apache Tomcat, Java Web Server, WebLogic and WebSphere. The most commonly used thing is Tomcat. Now let me tell you about the architecture of JSP, how the JSP page works. You can see a web browser. The web browser makes a request of a web page. So that is what explained in step 1. So when the web browser request has come, immediately through internet, this request has been sent to the web server. So when the web browser makes a request, the request has been sent to the web server. That is explained you in step 2. Once it reaches the web server, it looks for that JSP file. So in step 3, the JSP file has been sent to an engine. Of course, we call it as JSP engine, which has been deployed inside the web server. This can also be called as JSP servlet engine, because internally every JSP page gets converted into a servlet. So that is why in step 3 we call it as JSP servlet engine. So once it reaches the JSP servlet engine, the JSP file has been parsed. Parsing in the sense it goes through the syntax and every statement of the JSP file gets processed. So once it has been processed, an equivalent servlet source code has been generated for it. So that is what step number 5. After generation of the servlet source code, that servlet file gets compiled into a class file, because every Java file gets compiled into a class file. So that is what happening in step 6. Once the class file has been generated, it instantiates the servlet object. Instantiating the servlet object in the sense every servlet is going to have the objects like init, service and destroy. So appropriate methods of the servlet has been called here. So once the instantiation of servlet, that is execution of the servlet, takes place, the response object gets created. The response is basically the HTML response, what we are going to send it as a servlet output. So once the HTML response has been generated through step 8, via the internet, again it reaches as a step 9, it reaches back to the web browser as a display or output. So this is what we say that the generation of dynamic web pages can be done through the JSP. So this is our JSP architecture. Now with the help of the above architecture, let me tell you about again the processes of how the JSP works. As we see in the step 1, the user requests for a JSP page through the internet via web browser. As the steps 2 says, the JSP request has been sent to the web server. It requests for a particular JSP file using an URL. So in the step 3, it reaches the web server. The web server accepts the requested JSP file and it passes the JSP file to the JSP servlet engine. That is what we have seen in step 3. So again, as a step 4, the servlet engine checks, because before parsing the JSP file into a servlet file, the servlet engine wants to check whether the corresponding JSP file already exists. If it is already existing, then it doesn't convert and or translate into a servlet file. If the particular file which has been requested does not exist, it performs the following functions. First, it tries to translate the JSP source code into a servlet source code. So, the HTML code gets converted into a servlet source code, means everything has been converted in based on out.println statements. Then the compilation of the servlet source code takes place, which generates a class file. Of course, it is a bytecode file of Java. Then it loads the class file and creates an instance. So, if we go through the last one, instantiating a servlet, that has been taking place using initializing the servlet instance by calling the JSP init method. After initialization, it invokes the appropriate JSP service method and it passes the request and response object. So, the whole process will take place if the servlet engine checks that the particular servlet does not exist. Suppose if the servlet already exists, that is the instance is a current instance or an earlier instance which is already running, then simply it forwards the request of the instance, or simply it forwards the request, JSP request, to that corresponding instance. So, once it has been forwarded, the response object would be created. So, after the creation or after the generation of the response object via internet, again this response goes from the web server back to the web browser, and the HTML results would be displayed on the user's browser. So, this is what the whole process of how a JSP could work. Now, let me tell you the life cycle of a JSP page. Earlier in servlet also you would have studied about the init method, service and destroy method. In a JSP lifecycle, it consists of, during instantiation we have seen here that JSP init, JSP service methods. Actually, in a lifecycle, 3 methods are available for a JSP page. They are JSP init, JSP service and JSP destroy. So, initially when a JSP file enters into the runtime, enters into the web server, it gets converted or created into a servlet class. Once the servlet class, that is initially it gets converted into a servlet file, after compilation it becomes a servlet class. Once the servlet class has been generated, it calls the first method which is called as JSP init method. This JSP init method is meant for initialization phase. So, that is what shown here as JSP initialization. After initialization, it calls the appropriate service method. Only during the service method, it calls the business logic, that is the business logic to run the processing. So, once every process has been over, the HTTP response has been made and the response has been given to the web browser, it calls the JSP destroy method to destroy that instance. That is what given in the last step of the life cycle, which is JSP destroy. So, the same thing has been summarized here as different steps. So, the first step we are seeing as translation phase. In a translation phase, every JSP page gets translated into a servlet for the first time. In a compilation phase, after translating it into a servlet, the servlet gets compiled and a suitable class file has been generated. So, this is as usual like our Java compilation phase. Then the initialization phase, once the class file is ready, that is after successfully creating a class file, the JSP engine calls the JSP init method to initialize the class file. So, after initialization, it calls the JSP service method. Here it handles the request which has been made by the web client, and it tries to create a response to be delivered to the web browser who has made the request. So, once the entire service has been completed and the response is sent back to the client, it invokes the JSP destroy method and it cleans up the resources. That is, the instantiation has been destroyed. So, this is what the whole life cycle of a JSP. So, here let us see one point. If a servlet page gets changed or modified, every time it has to be reconfigured in the web apps directory, but this is not of course required in a JSP page. But if a JSP page gets changed, there is no need that we have to notify it. The JSP engine would identify it automatically and it translates into a new servlet by passing through translation, compilation, loading and initialization phases, what we have seen in the above things. So, now since we have gone through the life cycle, now let us look through a small example of JSP. You just go through the code which has been given here. This is a small HTML, this looks like a HTML code, but actually this is a JSP page, because I told you already this is a JSP page is a combination of HTML tags as well as the Java code. This is what given here. So some HTML code has been given below. Let us save it with .jsp as extension for this particular file. In this case, let us try to save it as index.jsp. Let us try to place it in a folder and paste that folder in the web apps directory of Apache Tomcat in order to run this JSP page. I think you have studied what is Tomcat, how to deploy Tomcat, or how to install Tomcat and deploy Tomcat in the case of servlet. So installation and deployment of Tomcat is very similar to the servlet. So here in the web apps directory of Apache Tomcat, we are going to create a new folder, or we are going to create a folder in a desired name. Under that folder, this JSP page is going to get placed. Okay. Now let us see the steps of running a simple JSP page. The first step says that install the web server. Let us take an example of Apache Tomcat. Then start the services of the web server. After that, go to that is create a new folder called as My Application folder. Inside the My Application folder, let us try to test this JSP file which is called as index.jsp. Then deploy this My Application folder on the web server Tomcat. So for the Tomcat, we assume that the port number or we are going to use the port number as 8080 to get the services. Now we are going to deploy this My Application folder inside the web apps directory. As per our previous slide, we are saying that we are going to put it in the web apps directory of the Tomcat server. So let us try to put this My Application folder in the web apps directory of the Tomcat server, and it is listening through the port number 8080. So after this deployment, we want to visit that web page. Now using the client or using the web browser, let us use the URL, the following URL to view the web page. So the URL is http localhost port number, and on that particular Tomcat, which folder name we have deployed and what is the file name. This is what the syntax. And we are seeing an example for it, http localhost with the port number 8080. We have created a folder name called as My Application. Inside that, the file name is going to be index.jsp. If we call this URL from the web browser, the particular web page what we have created for the index.jsp, the answers would get displayed on that particular web page. Now let us look through the directory structure of JSP. So this is the directory structure which has been shown from the Tomcat. So inside the Tomcat, there is a folder called as web apps. So inside web app, there is a folder called as webinf. Inside webinf, classes folder is there. Again inside webinf, web.xml is there, library folders are there. Those things have been explored in the case of servlets, but in JSP we are not going to touch any of these folders. We are going to put our own folder, or we are going to put the JSP page in the web apps directory. So either you can place the JSP page in the web app directory, or you can create a folder on your name or in your desired name. So in the previous thing, we have assumed that it is called as My Application. Let us place this My Application folder in the web apps directory. Inside the My Application folder, the JSP file can be placed. So apart from that, the static resources such as HTML, images, those things can also be placed in the web app directory. Okay. So this is what the directory structure what we are going to use for JSP with respect to the Tomcat. Now we have seen how to work with the JSP page and how the JSP page is getting compiled, all those things. Now let us look through the anatomy of a JSP page. Anatomy is nothing but the structure of a JSP page. So every JSP page consists of two parts. That is, one is of HTML part which is used for the presentation logic, and the second one is the JSP constructs or elements. JSP constructs or elements means it is just denoting the business logic part. So this JSP constructs can be of three types. In a JSP page we can use three types of constructs. Either it could be a scripting element, directives or actions. In a scripting element, Java code is inserted using scripting elements. If it is a directive, it controls the overall structure and behavior of the generated servlet. If it is an action construct, it controls the behavior of the JSP engine. Okay. So, in scripting elements, later we will see about 3 types of scripting elements. They are scriptlets, declarations and expressions. Apart from these 3 different types of JSP construct, there is one more thing available in JSP which is called as JSP comments. Let us go through one by one all of these elements. So, first let me give you a brief introduction about the JSP components and tags. I told you already that there are 2 parts for a JSP page. Either it could be a HTML or XML markup, or it could be a JSP construct. Suppose the second part, if I am using a JSP construct in a JSP page, it should come under or it should lie under these 5 categories. Either it could be a directive, declaration, expression, scriptlets or actions. If I take directives, later we will see what are the directives. They are page, include. So, this directives have to be described within @symbol. If it is a declaration, the syntax is shown. It has to be declared with a exclamatory mark. If it is an expression, then we have to declare it with the help of an equal to symbol. If it is a scriptlet, then we can embed any kind of arbitrary Java statements inside it, and it has to be embedded within this percentage symbols. If it is an action tag, again we can put an @symbol. Let us see all of these components one by one. First one, JSP directives. So, directives means these are all messages. This tells the web container that how to translate a JSP page into a corresponding servlet, or during the translation process of a JSP page into a servlet, these people will have the control over it. So, that is why we call it as directives. There are 3 types of directives. Either it could be a page directive, include directive or tag lib directive. First, let us look through the page directive. Page directive means it defines us. First, you can see the syntax of the directive. Every directive has to be started with @symbol. Directive is a reserved word. Then an attribute can be given and a value for that attribute has to be defined. So, the first one, @page symbol. @page is a directive. Here, we are going to define page dependent attributes. The page dependent attributes could be such as scripting language, error page, buffering requirements, etc. If we are going to use an include directive, it tries to include a file during the translation phase. So, during the translation phase, any of the file what you desire or what you wish can be included along with this JSP file. If it is going to be a tag lib, this declares a tag library. That is, it is going to contain the custom actions which is to be used in this page. Now, let us look through the page directive and include directive. Yeah, the first one is page directive. Page directive means this is used to provide instructions to the container, that is to the current JSP page. That is, we may code page directives anywhere in our JSP page. But conventionally, people say that page directives have to be coded only at the top of the JSP page. That is, you can look through the syntax of the page directive. It starts with a percentage because every directive has to be started and ended with a percentage symbol. That is why or not only directives, all kinds of JSP tags has to be started with the percentage symbol. So, the page directive starts with we say the reserved word as page. Some attribute, we can define some attribute. The value is ultimately the value what we are going to give for that attribute. Now, you can see some examples for it. For the page directive, one of the attribute is going to be an import attribute. Suppose if I want to import a particular class, that is the particular class is nothing particular package, that is java.util to my JSP page means, then probably I can use page import is equal to java.util. The second type of page directive is going to be content type, that is the attribute is going to be content type, which says that the particular web file is going to be a which type of content type it is following, whether it is going to follow text or HTML, that has been given as the second attribute. Likewise, many attributes are followed for a page directive. So, 2 of the attributes has been explained here, that is import and content type. Now let us look through the second directive, which is called as include directive. Include directive is very interesting. Normally this is used to include the contents of a resource to a JSP file. Contents of resource means the resource could be anything, either it can be a JSP file or HTML file or text file or an image file or whatever it is. That file could get included within the current JSP file. So the include directive tries to include the original content of the resource during the page translation time. So I think you know what is translation time, because we have seen earlier what is translation, compilation, everything that happens in a JSP lifecycle. So during the translation phase, the original contents of the file gets included here. So now you may have a question, what is the advantage of this include directive? So the advantage is code reusability. So you can just have the file only once, then wherever you require, you can include that resource in your current JSP file. Okay. So this is the JSP include directive. Now let us see one example for the JSP include directive. This JSP page is about getting from the calendar, creating an instance for a calendar and getting the current time of the calendar. But you just look through, there is a directive called as include directive, where the attribute is going to be file and the value is going to be header.html. So previously a header that is a header file called header.html has been created. Wherever you require header for a particular file, this file can be included, so that it promotes code reusability. So this is very much useful for including the header and footer for every file. So for every file there is no need that you have to create headers and footers. You can write it once, wherever you want to use it for your JSP page, you can include this header. Okay. The next one speaks about the tag library. So this provides output based on the common custom logic. So this is basically used for creating user defined tags with some prefix. So three components are involved here: tag handler, descriptor and tag library directives. So as far as we have seen about the directives, now let us look through the scripting elements. So if I say about scripting elements, this provides the ability, or this gives us the ability to insert Java code inside the JSP page. So three types of scripting elements are possible. So expression is there, scriptlets are there and declaration. First let us go through the expression tag. So expression means whenever you want to evaluate some expression, these expression tags can be included then and there in the JSP page. So we can see that the JSP expression tag is evaluated, converted into a string and inserted in the place of expression. So it could be, instead of giving out.print or out.println as in servlet, this expression tag is very much useful because it can print the values of the variables or method without any out.print, out.println. So it evaluates the expression and prints the expression on that particular place. You can see the syntax, it starts with percentage equal to, the expression could be embedded as like a Java code. So these are some examples of expression tags where percentage equal to is denotes that this is an expression. The current date can be embedded. So current date could be evaluated from java.util.date and it could be inserted on that particular place. In the second one you can see that equal to 3 plus 4, the value of 7 could be embedded in that particular place. This is very much useful because this can include the expressions and print on that particular place. Now let us look through the second type, which is called as scriptlets. Scriptlet means this is used to execute or insert arbitrary piece of Java source code in a JSP. Arbitrary piece of code means just like our Java code, this kind of Java code could be embedded inside the HTML file. Already I told you that HTML stands for formatting. This arbitrary Java code is used for writing the business logic. Now this has to be enclosed within the percentage symbol. This is what the syntax has been given to you. Now you look through an example. In the example, first an HTML page has been created. It is a form action where welcome dot, this form action is going to call a JSP page called as welcome.jsp. In the input type, text has been received. The text is going to be a username and one submit button is available. So if you look through the welcome.jsp, after providing the username, once the submit button has been pressed, the corresponding action taken will be welcome.jsp. So in the welcome.jsp, you can look through a scriptlet is available within the body tag. So what is this scriptlet? Scriptlet means here it is nothing going to, this is going to embed or this is going to execute a statement called as request.getParameter of uname. It is nothing but it tries to parse the user name which has been given from the HTML file, and it stores the corresponding name in a variable called as name, which belongs to the string data type. In the next statement, it simply prints out.print of welcome that particular name. Okay, so simply on the fly or as a fly we have embedded a JavaScriptlet code inside it. So second example you can look through, which is used to print a date. So similarly, the two lines has been embedded as a scriptlet. This can be embedded within any HTML code. So a new object for java.util.date has been created simply using out.println statement. This D has been printed or this D has been displayed. This just on the fly, this Java code can be embedded within a HTML page. So this kind of embedding arbitrary Java code inside like a HTML or a JSP file is called as scriptlets. So the third one is called as declaration tag. So the declaration tag starts with an exclamatory mark. It's a variable or method declaration. Declaration tag is used to declare variables, methods and inner classes. The code written inside will be called outside of the service method. Let us look through one example for this declaration tag. You can see that with an exclamatory mark we are trying to declare the data of integer type and the value of it is going to be 50. In the subsequent statement it is printed. Okay, so this is declaration tag. Let me summarize what has happened in this session. So we have learnt about the basics of JSP with its architecture. We have learnt the way how a JSP page is working and what is the life cycle of the JSP. So finally we have discussed about what are the various types of elements and what are the various constructs which is available within a JSP page. With a look through of declaration tag, expressions tag, scriptlets tag and the different kinds of directives tag. Thank you.